Well, thank you all for being here and for the invitation to speak with you this morning. Truth be told, Hill Kamen and I are actually here as spies trying to find out what you're doing so we can emulate it in Everett. I also wanted to give a shout out to Don Wick, who has done economic development work in Skagit County for a lot of years. I want you to know when it comes to Washington State University or representing Skagit County, he does a remarkable job. I see him every month at the WSU Advisory Committee meeting, and he's always talking about Skagit County and the needs here. What a remarkable story about Abby. And what I'm going to talk about this morning, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to talk with both Hill and I afterwards if you have time, and he can share the details with you. But I'm going to talk about really my journey around this issue, some of the demons that I faced coming into this, and sort of where we've come from, where I've come from, and as a community where we've come from, and where we think we're headed. We'll also talk about the Purdue lawsuit. It's a David and Goliath story, and I think you'll enjoy that. As Bill indicated, I came to this job from the corporate world, but in the 80s I served 7 years on the Everett City Council at a time when our economy was in pretty tough shape. As a community, we came together and worked hard to bring the United States Navy to Everett, a great addition to our community, now our second largest employer behind Boeing. Everyone is behind Boeing when it comes to employment. But we've enjoyed having them there. I've lived in, I think Vicki and I are now in our 11th house. Been married 49 years. Hardly seems possible. I told someone the other day, they said, "Why are you retiring?" And I said, I've been paying income tax since 1963. I started my career as a commercial fisherman in Puget Sound and Alaska. That's where, at least my dad says, I learned how to work. But working 22 hours a day and sleeping 2 hours a night, 4 days a week, it did teach me a lot about hard work and determination. So 2003, I ran for office. I actually retired from Verizon in 2002. Vicki and I were sitting down by our pool in Dallas. Everyone has a pool in Dallas. And I said, I think I'm going to go home and run for mayor. And she looked at me and said, "Have you lost your mind?" And I said, "Well, maybe, but our first grandchild had been born, and I thought, it's time to go home." So I spent all of 2003 running for office against someone who had been appointed, was a former firefighter. As you can well imagine, it was an uphill battle, but 18,000 votes later, I won by 274 votes and really faced a pretty adverse situation with a city council that over the years I really had to win over because a lot of them were committed to the former mayor. I can tell you in 2003 the issues around homelessness and street issues and addiction, I literally didn't spend any time on those issues. We have really a remarkable police department and prosecutor and court system, and they were dealing with those issues, and frankly, truth be told, I didn't want to deal with them. I would just rather that they dealt with the illegal activity that was going on and the challenges, and let me work on WSU and trying to ensure that Boeing stays in this community and protecting our base from closure. Those were the big issues that I worked on. But over time, what I saw and what my community saw and what I heard from business owners and people at the grocery store and people in their neighborhoods is this increasing problem with homelessness and addiction. And it really started exploding in our community in a way that, having been born and raised in Everett, it just didn't seem real. We were doing a lot of wonderful things, but there was this sort of black cloud hanging over our community. And what we learned in 2010 was, and it was really the first sort of national lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company, was that OxyContin in our community was creating a huge addiction problem. And I'm going to touch on this and then come back to it. What Purdue was required to do in a lawsuit they settled in a number of states around the country, including Washington, was really two things. They had to change the composite way they made that pain reliever, and they were required by law, if they saw any illegal activity around pill mills or distribution into communities, they were required to notify drug enforcement. And that's really the key of our lawsuit, which I'll come back to. So 2013, we spent a better part of a year as a city and a staff really looking at the complaints and the problems on our streets, and determined in 2014 that bringing a task force, a streets initiative task force of really people from all walks of life, from neighborhoods to businesses to law enforcement, together, we brought 23 citizens together and said, you need to help us understand what's going on in our streets, and you need to help us try to solve the problem that we see and try to make this situation better. So over the course of 6 months, they did that and made some 60-plus recommendations for the city and law enforcement and other parts of our community. And really what was at the key part of, and a major part or priority of those recommendations was housing for the homeless. And we were doing and have done through Housing Hope for really years, for decades, a lot of great work around housing families, housing single parent families, and getting help for those folks. But what we saw through addiction, first with pain relievers, and then when the access to OxyContin wasn't as plentiful, then moving on to heroin, we saw this exploding addiction problem. What the experts told us, and law enforcement knows this, and I know community action knows this, that your chance of getting clean or your chance of getting help if you have mental illness, or both, if you're living on the street, is about zero. And we didn't learn this through some divine intervention. We literally looked for best practice around the country and found in Salt Lake City really a remarkable effort led and started with the Mormon Church. But over the course of about 10 years, they went through a process that we're really beginning at the beginning stages of, and that was providing housing for the most vulnerable. And this housing has been called low barrier housing or supportive housing, but this is the basic idea. If you qualify for that housing, you don't have to be clean and sober to go into that housing. You don't have to have your mental illness being treated. And what we will provide if you qualify for that housing is 7-day-a-week, 24-hour care and support. There are medical professionals there. There are other professionals that can help you with your addiction or employment issues. And the idea is to get folks off the street in really a very controlled environment and get them the help that they need. Now, you know this in this community, and for professionals and law enforcement, they know this. A lot of these people, it's going to be a safe place for them if they've been addicted for decades to have some dignity, and it may be in their 50s or 60s where they go to die, frankly. But with some people who are early in addiction, and that represents about 20% of our people on our street are below the age of 24. And if we can get intervention early, there's an opportunity for those people to get past addiction, get their mental illness under control, and lead a productive life. And so really, the journey that we've started on, and Lloyd Pendleton was really the Messiah, if you will, in Salt Lake City. And the journey that he started on is very much what we're experiencing in Everett. The first supportive housing project they did, which was about 100 units, met with significant community resistance. And once that housing was done in a very quality way, and the neighbors and the businesses began to see that this wasn't some deep, dark place that we should all be afraid of, but rather it was a place for people to get well. And even if that's not what motivates you in terms of helping people, it was getting people off the streets that were affecting the community and businesses' quality of life. And so there's a lot of maybe different reasons for going in that direction. But once they did that first project, the community couldn't get enough of it. They really pushed Lloyd and the community and the church to build more. And over the course of about a decade, they built 1,000 units of supportive housing. Now, they still have challenges, and every community does. But what Lloyd shared with me, and this was sort of my transformation, was if you don't have a champion in your community, and he really talked to me privately about, you know, if you want to do something about this, you've got to be that champion. Now, for me, a few years ago, 2012, 2013, my solution was get a bus, put them all on the bus, get them out of here. I don't care where they go, just get them out of here. And I didn't have a lot of compassion about those who were on the street. I figured they were there by choice. They were there because they didn't care. And the long and the short of it, they were affecting our community's quality of life. But then I started to realize, after I lost a dear friend who was like a son to me at 33 from a drug overdose, and I began to talk with these folks on the street, that they were very much like you and I. Maybe they got addicted through a sports injury or surgery. Maybe they lost their job. Maybe they lost their family. They didn't get there by choice. But they were in such a state, and that's really what we found with this population. They didn't know where to turn. The decisions that you and I make every day that seem very normal in terms of leading a productive life, they just can't get their head around. So since 2014, we've done a number of things. We have over 100 people in scattered housing that are of this population. The other thing I would say in terms of community support and understanding, sexual predators are not allowed in supportive housing. The community has to feel and has to know that if this housing occurs in their neighborhood, and I want to talk about that a little bit, that they're not going to be putting their families and their kids and the community at risk. And so we started on a process of doing our first supportive housing project. And what a journey. First of all, we determined that the first site for the city was on city property. Made a few mistakes. It got announced in the newspaper before I went out and talked with the neighborhood. And you can imagine how those neighbors felt. And I've been doing kind of mea culpa ever since. But I can tell you that we've made some mistakes. But we've done, over the last year, significant outreach. Last November, our city council unanimously and enthusiastically supported this supportive housing. So now we start on this journey of finding a partner, and Catholic Housing Services has been a wonderful partner, but then you sort of run the gauntlet of where are we going to get the funds to provide this housing. So in terms of the support inside, the professionals inside the housing once we get done, we had really three partners: the City of Everett, Snohomish County, and Providence Hospital. And I can tell you, if as you go on this journey, look to the health professionals, because if you can keep people out of emergency rooms and long stays in hospitals because they don't have anywhere to go, it is a financial benefit to the medical professionals for them to have supportive housing. So we looked first to the Department of Commerce. They are really the agency that provides much of the capital funding. And then there's a tax credit process where the majority of the funding comes for our 65 units of housing, which is about a $15 to $20 million project. So what we found, and you may find this same thing, is that Spokane County for a number of years had been taking advantage of tax credits and capital funding. And Snohomish County, realizing that we weren't doing much, honestly, and we were always, as we were trying to do projects sort of behind the eight ball, we got the state legislature to pass a law that said tax credits for any given county will not exceed 35% of the tax credit available. Well, we had two great projects this year. Housing Hope is doing a project for those who are on the streets, and it's an employment-based project as well with some enterprise. And we had our project, and given the fact that Housing Hope had been doing this for a number of years, they knew how to put a project together that frankly scored higher than our project. And so here we are, we marched down to the Department of Commerce, and they say, well, this is great, but you know, your project hasn't scored very well. And we had the same challenge with tax credits. And it really was the leadership of Ed Peterson and Housing Hope and Fred Sastrom who said, look, we will make our project smaller. You come off of your project a little bit. And we got the tax credit board to agree that two projects this year, giving us 130 units of supportive housing, that they would do that if we could come to an agreement. Last night we had a city council meeting where we had recommended to our city council that $400,000 of our supportive housing dollars would go to Housing Hope to help bridge their gap. And again, not without pain, we had a unanimous vote by our city council to do that. Our next hurdle to get over this year will be to transfer that public property to Catholic Housing Services to build our project. So let me talk a little bit about what you're going to experience as you go on this journey, and you really do need to consider it. The first project is going to be difficult. And my best advice to you is determine the best site. It is not a negotiation, but get out in front of those neighborhood and community leaders and talk about that project, the pluses and minuses, before they read about it in the newspaper. That is not the way neighborhoods need to learn about projects. The second thing I would say is as you go through this process, you really need to get professional help to guide you. And there are people like Catholic Housing Services that do this for a living. They know how to do it. The church is a great partner. So really look to the professionals that can help you. And be prepared if you're an elected official, the old adage of no good deed goes unpunished, that you're going to have a lot of grief with that first project. But you really need to stay focused and committed. The one thing that we did, which was a huge surprise to me, is we started doing community outreach. And first it was 100 citizens, then it was 200, then it was 300. Of all the issues that I've worked on in the last 14 years, we've had more comments and more support from our community on this issue than anything we've done. WSU, the Navy, Boeing. This has been the issue that's really grabbed the heart and soul of our community. And that was really the transformation that I went through, was really to realize that, you know, this could be me on the street. I could be, as Abby was, one paycheck away from being homeless. And if we come at this with that kind of heart, it'll guide us to the right thing. It'll guide us to the right solution. But I also want to mention, because it's important, and it's important to communicate this to your community. This is not some Pollyann story about we're just helping the people who are homeless and that need our help. You need strong law enforcement, because there are people out there preying on this vulnerable population with drugs, with prostitution, with illegal activities, and we have a very robust law enforcement approach to this problem. And the community is going to expect that. But at the same time, we've put embedded social workers with our police department. So if we're out making contact with somebody who has trespassed, for example, we want to try to engage those individuals with, do you know the services that are available? Can we help you find that service? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes that first contact, people aren't ready for it. The other thing that we do, and I would encourage you to do this as well, as encampments occur in your community, you need strong law enforcement to keep shutting them down. Now, does that move the population around? Yes, it probably does. They go from Smith Street to our parks, and then we close them down there, or they go to private property. The other thing I would say is, and I'll give you a couple opinions from me. I've had leaders come to me and say, well, let's put some tents up. Let's let them live in our parks. That is not a solution. You know, we're not Seattle. We don't want to be. We're going to find permanent housing and support, whether it's scattered housing or supportive housing projects like that we're moving ahead on. Now, we've got a lot of other challenges. We need navigation centers, we need day centers, we need places where people can get shower and secure their belongings. Belongings that you and I would think are trash are very valuable to them. So we need to do that as well. We have people that are going through our court system that we are finding alternatives to incarceration. We're finding people who might have trespassed or shoplifted, and we've got them on our streets cleaning up the mess that they've made. And that's really been embraced by the community. We have our CHART program for chronic utilizers. The top 10 individuals in our community that were taking advantage of public services, primarily through first responders, were burning up between $100,000 to $1 million a year in services. There'd be 300 calls for individuals, one individual, through law enforcement or paramedics or first responders. And we were seeing them in our emergency room and in our hospitals. We now have a number of those individuals who are in housing. We have a PARI program. I think some of your law enforcement may be aware of that, where some of these treatment facilities in California or Florida or other states will give scholarships to your community, fly those individuals to that treatment facility for long-term care. And I would invite anyone, elected office or first responders, to contact our police and fire and we'll be happy to share that information with you. The other thing that's really been rewarding is to see the transformation of some of these individuals. We have one individual who I would see on the street all the time. He's in a wheelchair. He would fall into the bushes. He was normally intoxicated. He's been in housing. Is he still drinking beer and smoking weed? Yeah. But he is in a secure place, and our community is better for it, and he's better for it. And we're trying to get him more help that he needs. Another individual who had lost his family, had lost his job, was a former carpenter. We got him through treatment. I actually called him a few months ago and said, you know, my son needs some work done in his home. And he said, you bet, sure. Called me back about an hour later and said, you know, I'm so busy, I just don't have time to do it. And I said, that's good. I'm glad you're busy and I'm glad you're productive. And he's back with his family. So we can make a difference in individuals' life. But it is a journey and it's going to be a challenge for you. So 80 days left. People go, well, what are you going to do? And I'm going to do everything that Vicki tells me to do. So, I do spend a lot of time in Skagit County. I told your mayor of Anacortes, I still have the fishing bug, so I'm out at Washington Park and in the San Juans fishing. And so my life beyond these 80 days are a cabin in Hat Island and a boat that Vicki and I lived on for a year. And so we're looking forward to enjoying that. But I suspect that people like Hill and others in the community will keep, drawing me back relative to those who need our help on the street. And I'm passionate about it now. I mean, I've got the bug and I want to try to help. So on that end of the spectrum, I'll continue to be engaged. The other thing that I've told the president of Washington State University is the WSU North Puget Sound will be larger than the Pullman campus, hopefully in my lifetime. He feels a little threatened by that, but I think it can be, and I really thank the late Elson Floyd for his leadership as president of WSU. His efforts around medical school will really benefit communities in Skagit and Whatcom and Snohomish County. I mean, the whole idea and why that got approved by the legislature was to bring medical docs to small communities around this state. And that's the journey that we're starting on. So I know we're going to have, Bill, we're going to have a panel. We're going to break here for a minute, but I want to thank all of you for your time and attention. This is a great turnout. The community action group that you have, the work that you're doing, I applaud you. My parents are from Blaine. Probably some of you know Blaine. My late parents, my father passed away this year, both Icelandic, so everything in my household is Icelandic. My wife is Norwegian, so we named our boat Icewegian. That's what my kids have been calling themselves for years. And just a little bit of personal information. So my daughter, who was a deputy prosecutor for a number of years in Snohomish County, is now a judge for the Tulalip tribe. I'm very proud of the work that she does. Our middle son, Ryan, lives in Ferndale, has Down syndrome and autism, and we had him home really until after high school and found a wonderful group home there, and he's very happy with 5 other adults. And so I'm passing this way, Vicki and I, at least once a month. And then my son, Joe, 37, I told him, don't get married till you're 35. He's 37 and still not married. So Vicki said, why'd you give him that advice? I said, well, I'm not sure. But he does digital marketing and works part-time in Seattle and part-time in Everett. So I'm very proud of my family and my 2 grandkids. We're all around Everett. So I'm committed to making sure that our community thrives in the future. Just one more word about the journey we're on too. I think we're at least a decade away from providing enough housing that we're going to see a significant difference in our community. So if you're looking for or think that there's a quick fix in all this, there isn't. It's going to take time, but you have to start somewhere. So thank you again for having me here, and thanks for your time and attention.
We couldn't have asked for a better keynote today. One more round of applause for Mayor Stephanson. Thank you. Thank you again, all, for coming out today. My name is Joan Penny, and this is my husband, David Ryberg. And this is Doug Noblet. He's the Vice President and Marketing Director for Skagit Bank, and we have a whole table of Skagit Bank over here. Thank you for being here today.